Hi everyone, good afternoon. George Bernard Shaw said, criminals do not die by the hands of the law, they die by the hands of other men. Today we are going to inform you about the death penalty in the US. Our points are going to be the history of the death penalty, some key court cases, the statistics, and the pros and cons of the death penalty. Our speech can help one inform one about the death penalty, and one will be more knowledgeable about the death penalty. Now let's begin.
The death penalty, which is a punishment for killing a person for a crime, started here at the time of the English American colonies. The British brought it over when they settled in the New World. The first incident was with a man named George Kendall from Virginia in the year of 1608. In an article called Death Penalty by Michael H. Reggio from the PBS website states that he was killed for supposedly plotting to betray the British to the Spanish. He was executed by a firing squad. Years later, after the United States formed, the first federal incident of the death penalty was with a man named Thomas Byrd. He was charged for murder on high seas, which is on the ocean that is not part of the country's jurisdiction. Byrd was executed on June 25, 1790 by hanging. After nearly 2 centuries, the death penalty was banned in 1972. The ruling came from the case called Furman versus Georgia. In a reading called Death Penalty on the Legal Information Institute website, it says that the court invalidated existing death penalty laws because they constituted cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the 8th Amendment. The 8th Amendment stops courts from giving excessive sentences for crimes. So the death penalty was banned as it was seen as unreasonable and discriminated against the poor and minorities. Just 4 years later, in 1976, the death penalty was reinstated. This ruling came from the Gregg versus Georgia case. In the same reading as earlier called the death penalty on the Legal Information Institute website, it says that the court held the death penalty was not per se unconstitutional as it could serve the social purposes of retribution and deterrence. The death penalty was brought back as it was seen as a fit punishment for crimes such as murder, kidnapping, rape, even rape. After some rule changes, the court claimed that there would be no more cases that would use the unreasonable application of the death penalty.
Okay, let's talk right now a little bit about the statistics. So right now we can start talking about what people think about the death penalty. So according to death penalty website, mostly about 56% of Protestants in the United States, they don't want to have the death penalty, they want to have capital punishments. Also, in another way, the Catholic Church, mostly of them agree to have the death penalty, but it's about just for 52%. And the Lutheran Church, they also agree to have the death penalty. And let's talk about the religious, not affiliated people things. The people not religiously affiliated things that they don't want to have death penalty. It's mostly people who are atheists and agnostics. And let's talk about the death penalty in states. 27 states authorized to have the death penalty, and it is including the United States government, the Department of Justice, and U.S. military. But that's an interesting fact that United States military, they didn't have any executions at all, but it's allowed to have the executions. Another 23 states are not allowed to have the death penalty, such as New York, Illinois, and other states. But that's interesting that California have the death penalty, have death sentences. Yeah, and that's also interesting that Oregon and Pennsylvania will also have the death penalties. And and let's talk about the penalties sentences. As for now, in 2019, there was just like 30 death executions. And if we go back to the history, like in 90s, it was like 350 per year executions. So right now the peak level is decreasing, so that's good if we look at it. But on another hand, the time between the sentence and time between they got executed is increasing. For example, in 80s and 90s, it took over 6 years to be on a death row, to be executed after your sentence. Right now, people from the end of the 90s, some of them are still waiting to get executed, I can say. And right now, it's average of 22 years you need to wait to be executed. And as for now, there are two types of executions. It's electrocution and injections, but people right now use injections because, it's more, it's not too, I can say. And let's talk about the punishments by the race, and it's really, it's a really serious matter. So about 42% of all people who got executions, they are white, and other 58% are Afro-American or Hispanic or Latino people. But that's an interesting fact that the population of the United States is about 350 million in the United States. And mostly of them are white people. And this 58% of all African American and Hispanic and Latino people, we can say that, people are just given the population view if you look to the demographic. Also, that's a very interesting fact that if we look, I watched a lot of movies last night, and I can say that, for example, I can tell you one situation that happened in Virginia. So there was two men, one white man and one African American man. And they murdered 5 people. They made the same, I can say, the same crime. But this white man received just life sentences, while the African American received a death penalty. So it's a really serious matter. I guess for statistics,
I'll be talking about some 4 key court cases over the course of history that influence how we are today. The first would be Edmond versus Florida, where Thomas and Eugene were both at home, and Samson and Jeanette Thompson broke into their house, and initially they were just going to do burglary, but they ended up shooting both the victims and killing them both. And then a witness saw Edmund in a car outside the house. So during the court case, they were first all tried guilty, and in a few states, you can be tried for the death penalty for simply aiding and abetting. That's a key point to this trial because he wasn't directly involved in the murder. And in the first court case, it was specifically stated that he did not kill Thomas and Jeanette. So Edmund appealed the court, saying that the question we have to answer was, where did they plan on killing the victim? Did he have intent? So when he appealed the court, he was found found guilty for aiding and abetting a murder, but since he didn't have intent on murdering the victims, he was taken off the death sentence. And then we have Ford versus Wainwright, and this is a question of the 8th Amendment, the 14th Amendment. When you're sentenced to death penalty, you have to be clear-minded and conscious and not mentally unstable, meaning that you have to understand what you're dying for, like what the crime you committed. And if not, you go to the same asylum, you don't die. So this is a complicated case because in the beginning of the trial, he was found competent and understood what he was going to jail for murder. But while he was in jail, his mental state just started to deteriorate. So the two psychiatrists with 8 people watching both interviewed him with no attorneys present to see his mental competency. This happened in Florida, by the way, which is also key. And then one psychiatrist found that he was mentally competent, and the other psychiatrist found that he wasn't. So then we go to the governor, and then the defense attorney wanted to also give documents of 2 previous psychiatrists' evaluations of Ford, and the governor simply took the law into his own hands and said no, and submitted him to the death penalty. And then they appealed it, and then it went to federal court. But while it was getting appealed in federal court, Ford died. But one of the key quotes I have is Ford versus Wainwright, Florida Court, 1986, is the reason at common law for not condoning the execution of an insane is that such an execution has questionable contribute value, presence, no example to others. And this is how no deteriorating value. Then we have Roper versus Simmons, where 3 young men planned in advance a burglary and a murder of Shirley. So they tied her up and threw her off the bridge, and she drowned. She ended up drowning and dying. And the question of this case is about age. So both 2 of the defendants were 18, but at the time of the crime, and Roper Simmons. He was 17. By the time they got to trial, it was 18, so they tried him and found him guilty and sentenced him all to death. But then he appealed the court, saying that at the time of the murder, that he was 17 years old. The first, he appealed the 8th Amendment, saying it's cruel and unusual punishment, and then he appealed the state again, and he won this time, appealing to the 14th Amendment, which states that you can't be killed if you're a minor. Since I keep talking about the 8th Amendment, I'm going to tell you what it is. The United States Constitution, James Madison, 1791, is a legal document. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And this cruel and unusual punishment directly relates to what we've been talking about this whole time. And then we have Byers versus Reeves, two men, both convicted of double murder. This happens in Kentucky. Both convicted of double murder. Appeal the court to the 8th Amendment, saying that it's cruel and unusual punishment to have lethal injection. Lethal injection is sodium dipentyl, perchlorium bromide, and potassium chloride. So what that means is the first one knocks you out for 60 seconds, the second one takes away your pain, the third one kills you. While this happens, someone administers a catheter, which that person has to have a year of experience before doing so, and a warden is present with witnesses behind the glass. In the end, the court ruled that this is not cruel and unusual punishment, and they were sentenced to death.
The death penalty is a very controversial topic. Some people think that it should be abolished, and some people say that it should still be used even today if it is necessary. So today I'm going to break down the thought process on why some people think that it should still be used today, or why it should be abolished. So pros of why it should still be abolished. So First, we have Paul Goodman. He graduated from the university in 1987. He's done a variety of jobs, including a librarian and a researcher. So I took most of my research based on his work. So pros, it should deter criminals from committing serious crimes. Because if one knows that if he commits a crime, he might get death penalty for it, he might not commit it, and he might think twice before actually committing the crime. Another pro is justice has been served. He committed a crime, let's say he killed someone, so why should he not get killed back for committing his crime? It's like an eye for an eye, one can say. It's cost effective. Instead of having him sit in jail for all of his life and paying for his food, paying for his place to stay, if you have him just killed by the death penalty, it solves that problem. Another pro is it appeases the victims or the victim's family. The victim of a family, let's say one's daughter got killed. So the families would want to know that the victim, that the criminal has been put to death for it, because why should he get away with it and still be walking in the streets while he committed such a crime? So it appeases the victim of the family. Now I'm going to give you some cons of why the death penalty should be abolished. So one con is it can put innocent lives at risk. Maybe he didn't actually commit the crime, maybe he was framed. And so why should he get killed for a crime that he actually never did? So the death penalty is risking the chance of maybe he actually didn't commit the crime. The death penalty is applied at random. From 15,000 to 17,000 homicides, approximately only 120 people are trialed to the death penalty. That is less than 1% of all people. So why should that 1% get killed by the death penalty versus the other 15,000 to 17,000 people get away with it? So how do they choose who is going to be killed by the death penalty? Another con is they could be mentally ill. Maybe it's not their fault. Maybe that's how they were born, and obviously they should be punished for it. But you should not put them to death because they are mentally ill and they have a problem. So today we informed you about some key points of the death penalty. We mentioned the history of the death penalty. We mentioned the statistics. We mentioned some key court cases, and we also mentioned some pros and cons on why the death penalty should be abolished or why it should still be used today. And now going back to George Bernard Shaw's quote, "Criminals do not die by the hands of the law, they die by the hands of other men." Maybe now, after us giving the speech, we can now see what he was saying about this quote.